A los sonidores hay que decir que este país es tu país también.
Gracias. Everyone was as perfect. I wish everyone was as perfect as you, Pete.
Yes, folks. She warned us. She warned us about Pete. Amy Klobuchar there during the primary. I wish we were all as perfect as you, Pete.
It's a pretty special moment.
Episode 106, Left Reckoning. What happened to Labor Joe? Keir Starmer's War on the Left. Hello, David. Welcome.
Hey, brother. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I mean, I was reminded of that moment from Twitter, folks, last night. And I mean, really that's some beautiful Minnesota energy coming from Amy Klobuchar. They say Minnesota nice, but you wouldn't feel Minnesota nice unless you knew what Minnesota cold felt like. And that's a little example of that right there.
No, I mean, I that was her at her best, I think.
Hating Pete Buttigieg. Exactly.
Hating on Pete. Well, we got a pretty big show coming tonight. I mean, in just a little bit, we're going to be joined by Heather to talk about what's going on in the UK. And I mean, like, we haven't, we covered the Corbyn movement and in that fight pretty extensively. We covered the attacks on him, pushing him out of the Labour Party when that happened. But it's been a little while since we've gotten an update. And if you haven't been paying attention, folks, sorry to say it's not good. Not good at all.
Hasn't gotten any better. They are not letting him run in the election as MP. And he's not going to run as an independent because, as we get into it with Heather, he's too nice of a guy for that. And so, a really horrible end to what was extremely promising appearing opening in the Labour Party.
No, and I mean, not trying to make this be a downer of a show. We do have some fun stuff coming up in the post game that maybe I'll pitch up front because we have some bad news to start the show with. We got some vintage Noam Chomsky that Matt and I are going to be reviewing. I think we might be making that a recurring segment, not just with Chomsky, but doing some knowledge sharing from some of the lefty elders out there who I think are worth revisiting from time to time. We're looking forward to that, along with your calls and questions. And a quick reminder that our merch, we're doing a merch sale at Left Reckoning. You get 15% off all of our t-shirts and hats and our tank top, 15% off by using the code LASTRIDE. We only have a few more of the Left Reckoning on the road t-shirts, so we're trying to get those moved so that we can start filling up the shelves with some new things that Matt and I have been cooking up.
Yeah.
But yeah, brother, I mean, should we get into this?
Yeah. I think, with a story that, sort of has gone along with the formation of this show. I mean, I'll let you sort of lead us in.
No, I mean, this story about Warrior Matt Cole and this heroic strike that almost went on for 2 years has been something that I've gained a lot of inspiration from, from the way that people were handling themselves, to solidarity, the importance of the moment, the just nature of this fight. I mean, this one was one that was as clear as day, who the villains were and who the heroes were. And as Matt, as you were just saying, like, this was one of the things that right when we launched Left Reckoning, the strike began. It was the kind of story that we wanted to be covering on Left Reckoning because we had a feeling that I think has been borne out to be true, that unfortunately, there can be a lack of attention on the left sometimes to what's happening in certain parts of the country. And there's very important labor fights and, opportunities to build a strong working class movement all across this country. And this Warrior Matt Cole strike, I think, really embodied that. And I'll give people a quick recap in a second, but just not to bury the lead, that strike is over. And we're still going to be seeing what happens over the next couple of weeks, but it did not end in a victory. The striking workers are going back to work, some of them. Mm-hmm. Some people have been put on a do not rehire list. Some people have found jobs that have better pay than what Warrior Met is trying to force on these workers. But it was a moment where working people tried to band together, and they came up against an incredibly powerful force, which is American capital, without too many allies. Like, I don't want to underplay the amount of solidarity and support out there. One from like left independent media, two from the labor movement, two from a lot of people on the left. But as we'll get to later, like the political response from people in power was lacking, to put it lightly. So they went up and they fought and they lost. And I think it's a tough story for a lot of reasons. One, because of what this means to all those people who went up and they tried to assert themselves, and they did. And they stood on their own 2 feet and did something really inspiring. I mean, to last like a strike for a month is exceptional. To last a strike for 6 months is something else. To do it a year is amazing. Coming up on 2 years, I mean, it's heroic, and it's I believe one of the longest strikes in Alabama labor history. And they're going up against a coalition of finance capital that are some of the most well-connected, deep-pocketed, and vicious and brutal, examples of capital and capitalism that we have today. And I mean, like, we're going to cover this again in the next 2 weeks, because this is relatively new. The questions on whether or not it's right for them to accept, whether or not rank and file agrees with the decision from the UMWA to end the strike and bring people back to work. Those are things that I think that I'm going to take the lead on from the people who were on the ground doing that fight before I opine from the outside. So we'll revisit once we have a better sense of that in the next couple of weeks. But it is one of these things that, like, if you want to do this kind of thing, if you want to fight for the power of working people, we want to win, but we also have to know that sometimes, unfortunately, like, you will lose. I mean, you're going up against incredibly powerful forces, and this is just a moment to just say, like, you can't be rosy-eyed, you can't sugarcoat things. Going up and having these fights is hard, right? Which is why I get sort of annoyed sometimes when people are like very they just talk about these things as if like they're just pure questions of will, right? There's material conditions, there's tactics, there's capacity to be able to do these kind of things. And this was a moment where basically, the people in control of Warrior Met had the ability to wait this out, and they did, and they didn't get any pressure from the government. And maybe there's some strategies here or there that might have been mistaken in it, in the strike. Maybe it could have been more militant, etc. We'll get into that in a minute. But at the end of the day, what happened there was truly heroic. It should be an inspiration to people all across the country and in the labor movement. But yeah, it's dark. It's sad. It's a loss, right? And if you know anything about sports or politics, sometimes you lose. And the point is to learn to not turn your backs on each other, to not disperse, to not break down. But let's try to do some analysis and break this down.
I mean, just it's a little bit to highlight the like uncertainty that workers are thrown into, like from looking like less than 2 weeks before back to work, unclear, which scabs are going to stay. For instance, there's going to be drug testing for those returning, like you mentioned, the 40 that aren't allowed to return. And then also like it's going to be mandatory safety training to make sure they can adjust to the post scab conditions in the plant. I mean.
No, and like and remember that like the this is dangerous work, and the conditions in the mines have certainly worsened with less skilled workers who have been brought in from all across the country, from Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, etc. A lot of these people are going there chasing bonuses. A lot of these people don't have the same skills or knowledge as the people who have been on strike. So undoubtedly, like, they're returning to a workplace that's probably going to be less efficient, more dangerous, and in a bad state.
And like, I don't know if you wanted to get into the history, but I did find it. I think it was at the Nolan or the Kim Kelly piece, but that actually, like, what helped the execs here was the high price of commodities. So like in sort of bad times, promises, we'll take care of you later. promises not kept, and then the price of this stuff rises at an inopportune moment, and it's like it's just very damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. Because if my memory serves, the Blair Mountain situation was the opposite, where the price was falling out of it, and that in turn, like, so it's like you see why these battles are hard to win when the executives can win on both sides.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is one of those things, where sometimes like literal conditions in the market make this difficult. All right, so let's zoom out really quick. Here's like the Spark Notes recap for people who have not seen our coverage over the past 2 years, aren't familiar with Kim Kelly's work on this, aren't familiar with the great stuff they've been doing at the Real News, aren't familiar with the great stuff they've been doing at the Valid Labor Report on this. So go back pre-pandemic, Warrior Met Coal is in a dire situation. The company is really struggling. So the union workers decide that in order to they make a collective sacrifice. They make an agreement that while this mine is suffering economically, we will accept a lower pay agreement that will work for less than we think we deserve to make sure that the finances don't cripple the mine and prevent us from being able to have a job in the first place, right? Which again, like, shows like how willing to work with management these workers have been. But the understanding was always that once this contract came up for renegotiation, that they would see a pay raise, and not just return, but ideally exceed the previous terms and conditions for the work. Well, during this period of time, Warrior Met has a leadership change, and the coal company, which, by the way, just for people, I think you should be defending people in any kind of industry like this, but remember that this is coal that is used to make steel, right? It's not coal that you use to make to use in a power plant. But again, I don't think that in my opinion, I'd be supporting people who do that work too. But just to be explicit.
Yeah.
So there's this understanding that there's going to be a pay raise once certain conditions are met. Well, BlackRock and a bunch of other financial corporations from New York, right, come in and they take over the company, and the company starts making more money than ever. Becomes incredibly profitable. They make their money and then some. And then the workers say, okay, well, we made this deal. It's time to make good on it. And basically, the company refuses to negotiate with them. And in fact, it was the lack of willingness on the company side to negotiate in good faith with the union that pushed the strike in the first place, right? So, this big capital, right, big New York City capital, basically takes control of this company. The company makes more money than ever. It's fine. The sacrifice that these workers made worked. It kept the company alive. It should be a time when everybody is able to benefit in the increased amount of money that the company is making. But as we know, that's not what ends up happening. The people who make a bunch of fucking money doing nothing but coming into that situation with money in the first place basically demand more and more and more. And in this period of time, the workers go on strike. Brutal campaign to break it down. You have basically the police acting like hawks. Anytime a worker might have accidentally stepped on company grounds, they're getting harassed by the police. You had scabs showing up and driving their vehicles through picket lines. Right. Just like a truly like asymmetrical battle in the sense of like you have.
And the responders to which are like among the 40 people excluded from ability to return to work.
Yeah. Yes. And, and we'll get into we'll get into this Kim Kelly piece in a second. That sort of breaks down more of these dynamics in a second. But I also I can't talk about the strike because it's meant a lot to me to try to support it in our own way, to try to cover it. Not only were these kind of actions of, trying to show up and, express power, to try to build community support, have a picket line, all that kind of stuff, but internally within the union, just an incredible story of people looking out for each other, because this means that people are going without wages. This means that, Christmas time comes around and like the question is like, well, how are we going to buy toys for our children? People really looked out for each other, and it was a really beautiful example of the solidarity and the power that is possible when working class people stand together. you had this kind of solidarity, helping people out in difficult times, having a food pantry, Christmas toy drives, etc. Like a really, really beautiful example of what can happen when communities come together. But let's go to this Kim Kelly piece to sort of look at what happened and break this down. And if you haven't been following Kim Kelly's work, one, you really need to. And two, Kim Kelly's work on this strike in particular has been exceptional. And I really appreciate all of the work and the coverage on this strike. This was in The Nation yesterday. Why the Warrior Met strike is ending. After 23 months, the union tells more than 1,000 coal miners in Alabama it's time to head back to work without the contract they want. It may have cost the company over $1 billion in potential profits, but the high coal prices and the replacement workers that the company brought in meant that the strike hadn't made a sufficient dent in the company's bottom line. In 2022, Warrior Met Coal pulled in more than $640 million in net income. And a lot of this had to do with their ability to stockpile coal beforehand. So they had a lot of coal stockpiled, and as the price increased, they just were able to sell the already mined coal that gave them more time. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2019, the company did not shut down. Instead, while demand was low, it kept its miners working and stockpiled more than 2.8 million tons of coal. Thanks to that surplus, which Warrior Met sold off early in the strike, and the scabs who are paid supersized wages and monthly bonuses and have worked nonstop to keep the mines running, the company hit its production quotas and fulfilled its orders. The miners themselves were in a difficult position. They and their families were suffering while company bosses were not. So what went wrong? As the strike dragged on and coal prices remained high, the union struggled to keep morale high and the membership active. A core group of dedicated strikers and supporters did their best to build momentum, but attendance at rallies, events, and even on their picket line dwindled as many miners lapsed into apathy or found other work, right? Which is what happens when you're on strike for 2 years. Yeah. The seemingly never-ending series of injunctions and restraining orders that Warrior Met convinced the local judiciary to issue didn't help matters, especially after workers lost the right to picket. With law, and we covered that extensively on Left Reckoning. If you want, you can go back and look at these stories. With law enforcement watching carefully, the union did its best to avoid taking risks that could land members in jail. This cautious posture frustrated some miners who wanted to take more militant action, while others believed it helped embolden the company. Quote, "It felt like we were blamed for the strike lasting this long because we didn't do enough to keep the scabs out of the mine," Braxton Wright said. It was hard to hear that it was kind of our fault that we let the scabs cross the picket line and didn't shut down the production like we should have. But every time we did try to plan something, every time we had numbers, nothing happened. Wright also said that he and the miners felt that they and their union have been abandoned, left to fend for themselves against a hostile company in a right-to-work state run by anti-labor government officials and business-friendly local media. Alabama is a hard state to organize, he said. So many people from our local government to the local news to the National Labor Relations Board to the supposedly most pro-union president and labor secretary that we've ever had did not even mention us, We were just abandoned by everybody except for a few different groups that supported us and maybe a few politicians. Bernie Sanders from Vermont can support us, but the people that live here, they can't even be bothered to speak out or mention it or mention it.
Yeah, I mean, that NLRB point, that was like a early sort of feather in Joe's cap. Look at this great NLRB, and then they come down with the decision saying you're liable for any damage caused on strike, including like things like industrial processes that them going on strike paused, which is absolutely absurd. And like all these sorts of like the way like judges come in and it's a secret way that these things are neutered. Like this goes back to, we talk about the St. Louis Commune in the 1870s. They're like, all right, guys, no more parades. You can't do the parades. And like, that was like the end of the commune. And the exact same thing is like, oh, you can picket, but with like one guy on this corner way out here. And that's just for your safety.
Free speech zones, right?
Yes.
No,
exactly.
I mean, it just shows that the fact is that we have an asymmetrical system. Like we talk about living in a free country, but if you look at the way that labor law is enforced and practiced in this country, the advantages are so strongly in the corner of companies and corporations. luckily, you do have people like Bernie and folks like that who are trying to push back. But again, you have the most pro-union president. We'll get to him, boy. We'll get to him later. Just like getting applause lines for saying these kinds of things. And then one of the most important and historic strikes that we've seen in a country that has seen declining labor membership, right? Like people always say, like, well, why did labor membership, decline? Right. Was it, are working people confused or stupid or like working against their interests? Look at what happens here. Right. And this is a political problem. That the state basically allows the game to be rigged against organized labor, against working people. And yeah, people are going to get demoralized. That's the fucking point of what they're doing. And we'll get more into that in a second. Before we jump into that, I do want to make sure that we're letting people speak in their own words. So this is Braxton Wright, who was was quoted in the Kim Kelly piece. This is their conversation with none other than Bernie Sanders on the strike, and I believe this is from 2022, right?
It's hard to believe in a country we live in. You have to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. The workers deserve better. We're helping build this country while we're making CEOs richer. We've been on strike since April 1st at Warrior Met coal mines here in Brookwood, Alabama. It started back in 2016 when the Jim Walter Resources went bankrupt. The judge ordered us to take concessions, which was about $6 an hour on average. We lost 100% insurance to an 80-20 plan with a $750 copay per person. As this contract ended, they actually wanted us to take even more concessions. The new CEO, when he took over, that's when we seen a major decline in just the way they treated their employees. They made a bunch of bad business decisions that cost the workers while they still made their millions. We're not even asking for more than what we're had. We're just asking to get back what we give up so the company could be profitable again. They say they can afford it, but we don't deserve it.
Did they really say that?
They really said that they will starve us out before they give us what we want, that we do not deserve it.
So they acknowledge that they have the money to do away with it?
They have the money. We set out to make it a career instead of a job. And America's it seems like it's shifted from careers to jobs.
I want you all to understand that you are respected immensely all over this country, not only for your courage, but if they get away with slashing your health care, you got strong unions, you're in great unions. What do you think they're going to do to the guy who doesn't have a union?
Yes.
Right? If they are able to cut wages and not keep up with inflation, what do you think they're going to do to people who don't have a union?
It's time for the worker to stand back up. It's past time.
Yeah, I mean, that last point that Bernie made, I think is so critical, and I think why Bernie inspired so much support and meant so much to so many of us was this understanding that like this is all of our fight. You know what I mean? Like this fight means a hell of a lot to those workers and to their families and to that community. But it also means a lot for workers across the state of Alabama. It means a lot for workers across the South. And it means a lot for workers all across this country because, yeah, if they can get away with that with the UMWA, what are they going to do at all these other places that don't have strong union protections?
Yeah, that's why I think like power is power of capitalists, of the boss, is more interesting than this greed as an explainer of these things. And it reminds me like you got to think of like we have to think of this as an attack on all of us because the capitalists definitely do too. Like part of that, they're performing not just for themselves and their own. They know when they go to their clubs and their fancy shit that they have other bosses that they're in business with, and they're like, hey, don't fucking let that. You can't be letting these wages rise like that. You can't be doing that. There's exact same pressures on Howard Schultz. Like he's performing for bosses across America, and they are conscious of that stuff. And so, yeah, that was a good point by bringing there.
Well, I mean, we're gonna zoom out in just a second, but I want to like really hit this point home. That what we want to do is difficult, right? It's one of those things that's simple to say, right? Working people should unite together and fight against the bosses. but it's hard. It's really hard. Not just in, from a level of like capacity. If you want to do a strike, people, I mean, like, I love folks who want to see this thing change. I'm not coming at them, but this just shows sometimes to me the lack of like thought as to like what is necessary to achieve what we want to do. I remember when Biden first gets elected, there was all these people clamoring for a general strike, right? And like, yeah, like in the sense of like, what do we need to be able to do to change this country? We have to organize the working class, and we have to withhold our labor to win the concessions that are necessary. But do you know what a general strike entails? That entails coordination, right? So being able to talk to everybody and coordinate action. And if you're trying to do something where you're waiting them out, that means supporting each other in a period of time where things are going to get really lean and really difficult. And if the left in this country is unable to like seriously stand for these workers and these miners in one of the most prolonged strikes in Alabama's labor history, I don't know how you could ever be talking about something like a general strike, right? I don't mean that to say these things are impossible. I'm saying these things are like, this is an example of a lack of capacity that I think people need to recognize and think about more than the conversations that everybody has. This is just like about will and about heart and about character. And it's like, certainly for some folks we're about to talk about in a second, that's what's deficient. But we have to be able to build, movements that are really capable of following through on the will and the passion and the commitment that we all have personally to these things, right? Because like I can feel as strongly as possible as I do about what happened to these workers in Alabama, right? But what am I able to do? I'm able to talk about it a little bit on the show, trying to, highlight these things. It's insufficient, right? We need stronger mobilizations. We need stronger organizations to be able to put these kind of things in place. But maybe we can get to more of that in just a second, because I do want to turn our attention on somebody who I think should hold a lot of blame, in my opinion, and he's been mentioned a few times. So this guy, Joe Biden, ran for president, and let's just hear what he was saying when he was running for president of the United States of America.
As I said last night in my hometown, I view this campaign as between Scranton and Park Avenue. All Trump sees from Park Avenue is Wall Street. That's why the only metric of the American prosperity for him is the value of the Dow Jones. Like a lot of you, I spent a lot of my life with guys like Donald Trump looking down on me, looking down on the people who make a living with their hands, people who take care of our kids, clean our streets. Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built this country, and unions built the middle class.
Okay.
I'm not joking. Without unions, there'd be no middle class. That's a fact. And by the way, there's a reason. You're the best trained workers in the world. That's not hyperbole. When you do well, everybody does well. You know, grow up here in Scranton. We're used to guys that look down their nose at us. We're looked at people who look at us and think that we're suckers. Look at us and they think that we're not equivalent to them. If you didn't have a college degree, you must be stupid. If, in fact, you didn't get to go to an Ivy school. Well, I tell you what bothered me, to tell you the truth. Maybe it's my Scranton roots, I don't know. But when you guys started talking on television about Biden, if he wins, will be the first person without an Ivy League degree to be elected president, I'm thinking, who the hell makes you think I have to have an Ivy League degree to be president? I really mean it. I found my backup. No, I'm not joking. I'm not joking. Like, guys like me were the first in my family to go to college. Up here, my dad busted his neck. My dad came up here, worked here, lost his job like a lot of people did here.
Joe gets it, right? Joe's a working class kid from Scranton. This campaign is about Scranton versus Wall Street, or Scranton versus Park Avenue, right? It's the working people, the people who do things, who create value in the society, against the people who just extract value from the society, right? That's the framing. Where the fuck was Joe Biden for these past 2 years? Where was Joe Biden? He knew about it. Come on. Joe Biden purposefully sat this fight out. And look, we know what the Republican Party is, right? we should have no illusions or expectations that the Republicans are going to come in and do this kind of fight. The Democratic Party claims to be the party of unions. Joe Biden claims to be the most pro-union president in this country's history. Where was Joe Biden at a fight that is just so damn clear? It's about bosses versus workers. It's also about parts of this country that have tremendous amounts of workers and natural resources. And what happens in this country, the natural resources of this country? Traditionally, do those flow into the pockets of the people who live in those communities, or do those get siphoned away into the centers of capitalist power, the financiers, right? What happens to natural resources in this country? You strip away the natural resources from parts of this country that people like to forget about, or act like they don't matter, act like they're backwards. That is what builds up, the beautiful, beautiful opulence that you see in a place like New York City, right? If you are truly going to sit here and say, I'm here for the little guy, I'm here for the people who have been forgotten in this country, I'm here for the people who have been pushed around for far too long from fancy boys like Donald J. Trump, this is your fight. And where was Joe Biden, right? Where was Joe Biden at the railroad strike, right? We know who he is. It's, saying this is not about being like generally surprised, but it's about placing blame on who deserves the blame to be placed on. Because this is something that it's ridiculous that somebody like Joe Biden was not present for.
Well, and like this one, and also I'll go back to the rail strike. It's very clear Joe Biden wants to portray himself as this, this union Joe, right? Working class, middle class Joe. We get a little bit further away from where I'm like happy when we get to that. But he voted against the breaking the rail strike in the early 90s. If he delivered for rail workers in December instead of fucking them, to be honest, I think he's sitting pretty as far as his domestic labor agenda. And he didn't. And why didn't he? Because of the fucking rail oligarchy, and because of all the people who are taking cash out of that. Like it's simple as that.
And in this case, it's people who are also very cozy with Joe Biden, which is the financial class in this country.
Yeah, that's what the reporting that said that they were confident the entire time that that's the outcome that they were going to get tells you everything you need to know. And this stuff, look, it might be enough to win re-elect to say, look, the Republicans were against us, and like we had these union leaders said we could do this. But that's not gonna do shit for these workers. That's not, and ultimately that's just gonna keep corroding. And look, not every Democrat has the bona fides for being a union guy that Joe Biden has, right? Like we can quibble over how like accurate it is, but that is an advantage that he brought to that. And like, after he's gone, then what are you going to say? Like, I guess maybe you run Sherrod Brown or some shit and just have him talk too. Like, I don't know.
But look, on the national level, like you look at the state of the Democratic Party, you look at popular opinion in this country, and the Republicans in the United States, and even in places like Texas, represent actually a very minority position. When you look at public polling on the issues and the things that they want to do, these aren't popular things. A lot of times, liberals have sort of got this idea in their head that, oh, well, all these working people are voting against their interests, right? This is like the classic line. Oh, these people deserve it because of blah, blah, blah. One, if you're saying that about the Warrior Met folks, you should take a really long damn look in the mirror, because you don't know these people and you're making a lot of assumptions about folks. Two, what message does the Democratic Party's failure to show up in this fight send to workers in Alabama? Does it say to them, hey, we're the ones who are out here looking for your interests. We're the ones out here who are aligned with you. Or does it say, we don't give a shit about you? And this is the number one factor in the fact that, when people talk about, oh, all these people are like the political like arena is changing, right? People are like, working class voters are moving to the Republican Party. The largest voting group in this country is it's non-voters, because people realize, oh, there's no reason that we should be sorry. when you do something like this, you send a message that's very clear that people that you do not have working class people's back. And why line up behind the Republicans who are going to fuck you, or why line up behind the Democrats who very clearly aren't here or want to participate in your fight, right? And you talk about the need to shift the political map in this country. There is no better opening for the Democratic Party to come in here and make a big stink about this. Where is the governor of Alabama? Where are the state senators in Alabama? Look, you don't even have to take like a radical position on this. You could take like even like a nativist position on it, right? Should companies that are, should like financial capital in New York City be able to extract wealth from our region, or should that money be enjoyed by the folks who live in our community and want to fight and want to build a better life for their families and their community and all that kind of thing, right? You can make that argument. The Republicans aren't going to do it. The Democrats, all they got to do is show up. You show up and you say, we're here in your fight. Look, you might have not voted for me, but I recognize that this is, a collective fight in this country. I'm the union president. I'm the person here. And also, where is the Democratic Party in Alabama? I know some people showed up from time to time. But it was not consistent. And like I see the same kind of things happen here in Texas too, right? Where it's like there are these kind of fights that, like, if you're in the minority party, if you're in the party that's been historically defeated and weakened in this country, these are the kind of wedge issues to make it clear, right? If the argument is like, oh, Republicans don't have the interests of working people, then make it really, really damn clear and say, who's the one standing with you on the picket line? Is it Tuberville, right? Is it the governor of Alabama, right? Or is it Union Joe or blah, 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 whoever in the Democratic Party wants to make that stand? The only, person who was doing that with that national scale was Bernie Sanders, right? And good for him. Thank God for him. But, even that, unfortunately, it's one senator.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that, we can get to the Hamilton Nolan piece a little bit that gets into this is a consultant driven problem, but like that's, I think, part of it. And part of it is like capital, like Joe is like finance Joe. To hear him talk about fucking college education and financing that as the guy who made that not able to be bankrupt or declared or discharged for bankruptcy. Like, I mean, I don't know that the consultant thing is a very sexy answer to a lot of the problems, because it is true that the incentives there are just absolutely whack. It's to sell media because you get a percentage of that. And these and like these sort of consulting firms, yeah, they seem extremely like hostile to these areas. But I also think it is just like we had the Valley Labor Report the entire time. They're saying like, can we get some Democrats? Like, oh, here's a fucking Republican acting like he's going to come own this issue. Can we please? And no. And like, to me, it's like, I don't believe that these politicians are just fooled by the consultants. I think they're actually like averse to flexing those muscles to like be like Joe Biden, even when he says the middle class shit. What does middle class mean? Does that mean you have investments on top of working for a wage? Like that, to me, that's what I'm hearing. Like you're really you're
They're
working,
scared.
but you're also you're worried about your housing prices. Like, and I gotta say, like, that's not gonna cut it. And like that might be good American, electorate politics, but like that's a dead end as far as like delivering for this stuff, because I just don't think like we have Democrats that are willing, like maybe some younger Kazar obviously, or like folks like that. They're and they might have like a little bit more Bernie energy, but by and large, this party's been hollowed out by the type of people who are absolutely averse to doing any sort of this. Like that's it. Biden's like right, like people rightly point out he's been an anti-working class vote his entire career. And he's still better than most Democrats on unions.
Well, I want to bring this up just because, this was, we usually don't do super chats here, but Michael Reich, just gave us a pretty sizable donation. And I want to thank you so much for that, and like really appreciate, the support. I mean, there's not a lot of other places that are like able to do this kind of thing, and like, Lord, very generous, and appreciate that so much. I'm pretty floored. Thank you very much. No, because, but no, I mean, I 100% like agree with what you're saying, man. Like the thing that it's like, it's so fucking frustrating to just read endless think pieces about like the culture of this country, right? And it's like, oh, culturally we've never been more divided. When you see that, like, this is one of those moments, right, when the promises of the difference between different political parties and political movements start to ring a little hollow. Right. I'm not one of these people who says there's no difference between the Republicans and Democrats. I think that there is, right? And I think it's worthwhile understanding that and pointing that out. But you can see why so many people in this country are disillusioned with politics when you experience something like that. Like, imagine if you voted, and, like, again, this assumption that, like, everyone who's at Warrior Met Coal is a Republican is ludicrous and false. First of all, and even if they were, you should still be able to support them, right? But imagine if you vote for somebody like Joe Biden because you're like, all right, we need to have, like, a pro-union guy in office, and you're in this fight for your life that has, like, national importance, incredible meaning to the local community, and incredible meaning to the state and to the region, and there is crickets from there. I mean, is it surprising that folks start to, dip out of politics? Is it surprising, people, like, they love to wag their finger at non-voters, and you see something like this and you realize why so many people are caught into, like, this kind of political depression that, like, voting or participating in politics isn't going to open up doors for me, because the people in power aren't very interested in actually showing up and fighting for working people, right? Like, there are just so many moments in this country. And if you've looked at the labor struggles that have happened in the past 2 years, we always talk about, like, oh, are we in a strike wave? Look at the places where those fights were happening. Those are places that the Democratic Party has lost significantly when it comes to presidential, Senate, and statewide elections. What better opportunity to show the deficiency of the Republican Party than to really show up and be a fervent supporter of unions and workers' rights? And it just shows, just clear as day, that the consultants in the Democratic Party have decided it's not even a cultural affectation. They've done the math and they've said, we don't need these people. We're going to let them go. And that's so much more significant than, all this other kind of nonsensical stuff that people focus and spend so much of their time on.
Yeah, and I think this kind of sets the table for another narrative of loss with the Corbyn thing. And, like, the thing that I sort of worry is that, we look at Biden and these folks making these decisions, and the Hamilton Nolan piece is very much written in the voice of somebody thinking, like, hey, what are you doing? Like, this is, but I gotta say, maybe they know what they're doing. Like, I feel like the certain finance banker wing, anti-worker wing of Democratic Party feels like, shit, these Republicans are fucking up. Like, and we can win, and we can lose some of these pro-worker freaks that are making primaries a bit of a problem. And I wonder, like, especially the way, like, labor is just like, yeah, fuck the left, and we're going to try to wait for our turn for when the Tories fuck up enough that we get into power. And that's a dynamic that I'm not quite sure how to attack yet. But yeah.
Well, we'll have more on that, coming on the show in the next few weeks on Left Reckoning. I know we're going to be talking about some of the successes that the right has been able to win in Canada because of the deficiencies of the, what placeholder left is what we can maybe call them. And unfortunately, in the United Kingdom, a real cleaning of house of the Labour Party, which was a much different project and much more promising in a lot of ways than what has ever been sort of attempted in the U.S. So let's get over to this conversation with Heather. Matt and I will be coming back, and then we don't forget, folks, we have the post game, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, to get access to that. But without further ado, let's get to Heather.
Well, also stick around after the interview because we have a little Trump Truth Social update on our boy Ron DeSantis, as he's calling him now. See you, folks. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. David, hello.
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing well. And joining us from the UK this afternoon for us, is Heather Mendick. Heather is an activist and ex-Labour member. But before we get to that, we wanted to talk to Heather about what's going on with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. We've been having our hands full with the Democrat problems here in the U.S., but it seems like Labour is also going through quite a bit of, perplexing and self-defeating or left defeating, maybe we should say, actions. Jeremy Corbyn, I saw the news he was going to be disallowed to run as an MP in the coming elections. Can you just give us, and take your time. We have time. What is, and is this over this anti-Semitism stuff? Can you just give us a chronology of like what the accusations against Corbyn has been here, and why Starmer has acted this way?
Okay, so I can't give the full chronology because it's insane, right? But I can tell you the kind of pivotal issue that this is around. So there's a kind of what's the word, statutory body in the UK called the EHRC, which is the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. And they are really a Tory front organisation, but they appear to be neutral, and they're in charge of implementing and monitoring equalities legislation. They decided to do an investigation of the Labour Party. This is obviously not a neutral decision. The only political party they've ever investigated before is the British National Party, which is a very racist far-right party. And they did it because of the whole kind of narrative that's been created around Labour Party anti-Semitism. And the report, which I haven't read, I can't bear to read it, but I've read extracts. Essentially, it found that there was breaches of the law. And it did that through a kind of technicality. So it needed to find breaches of the law because it was politically necessary to label the Labour Party as having broken the law. So they had to kind of cook up some explanation. And they said that the problem was that the leader and the leader's office had investigated in complaints of anti-Semitism, and that should have rightfully been just something that the party took care of. There should have been a division there. This was something which the whole of the media have been hounding Jeremy to do. And actually the complaints team and the investigations team asked for support from the leader's office because there were changes of staff. There was a huge number of complaints. It was very controversial. So again, this shouldn't be problematic. And this is something which Keir Starmer has done since then. He's really, really heavy-handedly got involved in the investigations process, but the HRC don't seem to care anymore. So this report happened. It came out. And on the day it came out, Jeremy Corbyn issued a statement. It was talking about what happened under his watch, so he felt he should do that. And in his statement, he accepted the findings of the report in full, but he said that undoubtedly anti-Semitism had been exaggerated, overstated, I can't remember the exact phrasing, by the media and by his political enemies. And that was used as a pretext to suspend Jeremy Corbyn's membership of the Labour Party. That pretext didn't hold. He was reinstated. But Keir Starmer then removed the whip from him. So that technically means he's not part of the parliamentary Labour Party. So he's been sitting as an independent MP in Parliament ever since then. Now, I think some people thought he might get the whip back, that he might be allowed to stand. I think after a short period of time, it was obvious to a lot of us that was never going to happen. But he stated this week, he used the EHRC taking the party out of kind of monitoring processes as a reason to hammer the left. And one of the ways of hammering the left is to hammer Jeremy Corbyn because of the symbolism of that. And he said he's never going to be allowed to stand. And obviously that's interfering in disciplinary processes, but no one cares because they're all on Starmer's side and they're all against Jeremy in the media and so on. So that's the pretext. Of course, it goes way back before that to the whole kind of issue of the way in which a narrative was created about anti-Semitism in Labour.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about that. Like that we can't. I think the American media is a little bit better at acknowledging that this sort of weaponization takes place, and it's actually it's not as good at acknowledging it as I would like it, but that seems like a matter of fact. Like I have no problem. I'm easily saying that. Like anti-Semitism is pervasive in culture, in the Western Anglosphere culture. Like David and I just started tried to post on a new platform the other day, and the first comments were like anti-Semitic stuff. So like this is a problem widely, but when it gets sort of specifically aimed at the left, and particularly people who are critical of Israel, it's just a clear problem with the discourse and political weapon. Like that to me, like that seems like Corbyn. By like he can't even if he wanted to, it's a disservice, and everybody on the left who's acting like that doesn't exist is doing a disservice to people understanding like the state of politics.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's got kind of really ridiculous in the UK because of the way it was used in the Labour Party, and because a lot of people who came into the movement through Jeremy Corbyn didn't have a lot of experience in the Palestine solidarity movement, hadn't seen this happen before. As soon as they heard Jewish people saying, look, we're really uncomfortable in the Labour Party, they started to feel like maybe there's something going on. Even though there wasn't any experience that they had necessarily they could connect with, they thought, oh, well, maybe we should like take this seriously. And as soon as that process started, a lot of people went down a path that was really problematic, where they couldn't come back from it, where they'd started to accept that there was some truth in it. And that has happened all across, some very prominent left-wing people, like Momentum went down that path. Momentum went down a path of saying, Momentum is the organisation which was set up to have Corbyn's back, because you get a leader of the Labour Party who is left-wing and you've got to have a movement behind him, otherwise everything's going to get screwed up very quickly. So Momentum came into being. But when the anti-Semitism thing hit, they said we can walk and chew gum at the same time was the approach. I don't know which was walking, which was chewing gum, but one was saying that anti-Semitism has been weaponized and the other was tackling anti-Semitism on the left. What happened was they didn't really talk about the weaponization at all. They didn't give people political strategies for dealing with that, political understanding, political education to do that, because there was a kind of sense that if they did that, they'd maybe be indulging anti-Semitism. There was a confusion around that, I think. And they thought that if they tackled anti-Semitism on the left, it would be okay. But actually what they ended up doing was getting sucked into all of these accusations. There were literally organisations churning out hundreds of accusations, sometimes thousands, that were being sent in to the Labour Party. Some of which, I mean, one MP, she put in 200, 180 of these related to non-Labour Party members. So the party had to go through, trawl through, find the 20 that related, then investigate. And of course, we then got definitions of anti-Semitism, which deliberately were intended to conflate criticism of Israel, criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism. At that point, we kind of lost the battle. At that point, the crucial thing was, if you denied there was a problem, you were anti-Semitic because of that denial.
Now, was that the EHRC, or was that another body that was doing that conflating of the definition between criticism of Israel and also just like anti-Semitism against Jewish people themselves?
This is a lot of different groups have been doing this.
Right.
So that's been coming at us from all directions. So Jewish communal bodies have been doing that. And there's been a lot of pressure, and the government indeed has put a lot of pressure on universities now to accept this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Right. With all the examples. This has become a kind of obsession in this country, the IHRA definition. And our council's adopted it. My local council, local government. So the pressure is coming on to accept this. And as soon as you accept that, that becomes a way of kind of, even though the definition says, these examples may or may not be anti-Semitism, that's never how it's treated. If you say Israel is a racist endeavor, then you are ipso facto anti-Semitic, for example.
Right, which, I mean, John Kerry himself said in 2016 that like the settlements show that this is moving towards a one-state situation, and it can either be Jewish or it can be democratic. It cannot be both. And there's an effort by the Israel lobby to infantilize everyone's understanding of that just stark reality. David, I don't know if you had some. Heather, could you just outline your own expulsion from the Labour Party too? And we'll share the video where you go into a little bit more detail from your YouTube page. But just describe for folks that, because your experience and the sort of left experience here, it's like if when Ilhan was criticized by Pelosi for the "all about the Benjamins" comment. Yeah. And then all like Pelosi's like, yeah, you guys got to go. Actually, instead of just letting that undermine their actual good agenda that they were supposedly going to do alongside the squad, and that never went anywhere because of that. So yeah, just describe your own experience.
Yeah, so I was really involved in the Labour Party 2015 to 2019, and in 2017, I became the local party secretary. Now, that is not a glamorous role. It's like a big admin role and it's unpaid, but it's kind of pivotal. You have access to data, you control how the meetings run, and you kind of organize. And I became kind of an organizer on the left as well prior to that and going on. And so that kind of triggered a lot of the people in the local party who hate Jeremy Corbyn and saw all of us as kind of an incarnation of evil, irregardless of us as individuals. And so I think I stepped down as secretary following the 2019 general election. I thought, I'm going under the radar now. They won't bother with me. A lot of people I knew who'd stayed as secretaries did get suspended pretty quick. But then something happened locally in my branch, and I think they just got a bit spiteful and phoned up their mates in complaints. I think a lot of it happens like that. So people locally, they scour through your social media. They find things that they think look dodgy, they send them into the complaints department, and you get a notice of investigation. It's all very Kafkaesque. So I got, I think, something like 15 tweets that I had to respond to. I really didn't want to go to actually get into their framework of actually responding, because the whole thing is, we've got this stuff. You might be guilty, you might not be guilty, but can you please make yourself more guilty by replying to these charges? So I didn't want to do that. So I kind of just put out a statement. Most of the charges against me didn't relate, none of them related to Israel at that stage, which is interesting. They all related to me saying that anti-Semitism has been weaponized against the left and used as a smear. So I wrote a statement about that, and I thought, oh, that's fine. And I was planning to leave the Labour Party in November of not last year, 2021, because we'd have got through local selections. And then and I got a second notice of investigation with all the same stuff as the one before, except they added on, you shouldn't have told anybody the last one. You shouldn't have gone public with it. And then I was like, well, I might as well stick around now. I'll make a video and I'll stick around to try and get the results. So I was paying my membership for like 13 months just to be investigated, just in the hope that they actually came to a resolution. They eventually came to a resolution, and their decision was that you must be excluded if you say that anti-Semitism has been weaponized against the left.
Right. So not broadly like anti-Semitism, but like that you said that, and that's bad to say, even though
that's denialism. There's a whole word for it now. It's denialism.
That's denialism.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm guilty of denialism. Yeah. It's insane.
Right. So if you say that's happening, if I say Democratic majority for Israel is spending an awful lot in Democratic primaries on behalf of anti-left candidates, that's me being basically a global warming denier, I guess.
Well, I mean, could you talk a little bit? I mean, because I think at this point it's incredibly obvious. The target of this is to sort of clean house and push out people who supported Corbyn in the Labour Party. But, I mean, this is, again, I think intentional, but ironically, like a lot of Jewish members have been sort of targeted by this as well. People who, advocate for Palestinian human rights, correct?
Yeah. I mean, so if you're Jewish and on the left, you're much more likely to be disciplined. I think that's for two reasons. One is that you probably spent the Corbyn years speaking out more because, like, we feel more entitled to speak about Jewish identity and to say something. I think a lot of people were just very confused and didn't say a lot. So we've got more stuff in our social media, I guess, that can be latched onto. But also I think it's just much more challenging if you have Jewish people who are not saying what or the majority of Jewish people saying, and not saying what the dominant narrative is. So in that sense, those people get attacked. And there's a group called Jewish Voice for Labour who their whole executive committee has been taken through some kind of disciplinary action. And it was really bizarre this week because they were actually asking members of the Jewish Labour Movement, is the right-wing Jewish organisation within the Labour Party, which is Zionist, explicitly so. And they were asking members on the media of the Jewish Labour Movement, well, what do you think about Jewish Voice for Labour? And they were just saying, oh, they should just leave. They just, do they really want to be in this party? And they were just essentially excluding them. And if anyone had said that about Jewish Labour Movement, as if these people support apartheid, they should just consider whether they belong in a Labour Party, all hell would have broken loose, right? The media would have been like screaming about how anti-Semitic everyone was. But when you do it to Jewish Voice for Labour, and it's like, well, whatever. It's really weird. The whole thing is so disturbingly strange that it's really hard to talk about it because it just seems like absurd, right?
Yeah. How much of this is your sense? Because one thing we try to disentangle here is, especially with the sort of involvement in Democratic primaries, is how much of this is specifically about Israel, and how much of this is like that issue as like a anti-left sort of opportunity, and it's weird how that's played, because it's also like the candidates DMFI was giving to weren't even bringing up Israel often. And we're just doing.
They were running campaigns, just like, sorry not to cut you off, but just being explicit. They were running campaign ads that again had like nothing to do with Israel Palestine. They were literally things like, "Oh, this candidate is a bad Democrat," or right, just like on completely other issues. Sorry.
Yeah, I've tried to disentangle that. I think it's really difficult. I think there are different motivations for different groups. So this is a kind of they obviously tried other smears against Jeremy Corbyn before they really focused on anti-Semitism, and you can see that with Sanders movement and the use of smears there. And I think the anti-Semitism one was really effective because there were actors who were using it. There was groups in the Jewish community who were using it against the Palestine Solidarity movement, and internally within the Jewish community to exclude people on the left of the Jewish community, partly for their Palestine solidarity, but also partly because of kind of class politics of the Jewish community. And so that was kind of ready-made. And then all these kind of horrible centrist types and Labour Party latched onto it and started using it really kind of opportunistically, I think. And so for them, the primary reason is to destroy the left. And there are kind of really weird things coming up now where there have been attempts to label anti-capitalism and any kind of form of anti-capitalist politics as de facto anti-Semitic.
That to me, that sounds extremely anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? Like,
as if the Israel stuff wasn't anti-Semitic enough.
Absolutely, yeah. To imply that like Israel represents all Jewish people, and Lord in heaven. I mean, that's next level stuff.
And that's something
we've
that
got next level stuff. Yeah.
That's something that oligarchy is interested in. I mean, Nancy MacLean's book about the Koch brothers, they want to conflate sort of constitutional protections of minority groups. They want to insert capitalists as like one of those minority groups that you can't agitate against. So, that's horrible. And so let's talk about like what the left does now, because it seems like the parties in Starmer's making the decision for you guys. Like whereas like we in America, we're like, well, let's still like try this, and we're stymied here, but they're at least working with Ilhan in this way. Like Starmer's just like, nah, you're done.
Yeah, so I think the situation is if Bernie had won the nomination, it's more comparable to our situation. Right. So a bit more, because Jeremy did win the leadership election, and that gave a certain fear. And even then, in 2015, the fear wasn't as great as in 2017. As soon as we started to gain votes, as soon as we got a bit close to winning, then everything intensified. Like the summer after 2017, the 2017 generation, the 2018 summer was filled every single day with something about anti-Semitism. All over the newspapers, all over the television news. So yeah, I think it's a different situation for us because like we had a little bit of success, not a lot, but a little bit more success. And so the pushback has to be greater. So there's a real kind of really vindictive approach now. And I think there's no leadership at all from people who are comparable to Ilhan and the squad, who are the Socialist Campaign Group in Parliament. They haven't said anything collectively about what's going on. And I think that is because they're terrified of losing their jobs.
And I think if you don't mind, zooming out a little bit to remind like our American listeners, what happened with the Corbyn movement was incredibly historic, right? You took a party, you expanded the base, like the amount of members in it, which people surprisingly, when you started to ask them about things, oh no, they did like things going in a more left-wing direction than like the more neoliberal corporate style Blairism. There was a real tremendous amount of success in like mobilizing the public into the Labour Party. And like, this is just me, from across the ocean looking at it. It's like, it's very clear though, that what Starmer is trying to establish right now is that the Labour Party will never be open to that kind of public takeover. Like that's what he's trying to cement right now. That's off the table for the Labour Party under Starmer, at least.
Yes, I think he's trying to cut it off forever. I think he's the one who's in place. He was the only person who could have won that leadership election who would then do this kind of work, because he stayed in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet. Not the whole time. He left the summer of the attempt to topple Jeremy Corbyn, but he came back. And so people in the membership who hadn't been paying close attention, it was a very big party. So we had about a couple 100,000 members at the beginning of Corbyn's time, and by the end, over 500,000. And so most people are involved day to day in the party. They may be canvassing elections, but they're not doing much else. And so having seen Keir Starmer, and also having seen the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn in the media and not wanted to go back to that, not wanted to repeat that with the left-wing candidate for leadership, people thought, oh, well, Keir Starmer's promising left-wing stuff and it looks like he'll get an easier ride from the media, so we'll go with him. So he was the only candidate who could have won and then do what he's doing now, which is give the party back to the right for as long as possible. And rule changes have happened, which are very difficult to overturn, which make it very hard to get, almost impossible to get even a left-wing candidate on the ballot next time as a leadership election.
And like, also just, we had Daniel Finn on the program a couple of years back once this investigation first started. And, we were talking about one that, what we were just talking about, the conflation of criticizing Israel with anti-Semitism. But two, one thing that I think a lot of people in the U.S. might have not caught was that it was also revealed that there were officials inside of the Labour Party who are actively trying to crash the 2017 campaign. We're actively campaigning against Corbyn, giving them false information, basically, trying to misdirect the Corbyn campaign because they were afraid that in 2017 that Labour, the party that they were ostensibly members of, might actually win the election. And, again, for folks in the U.S. who might not remember, 2017 was close. So this kind of messing around really had tremendous consequences. And like, it just shows that there's a shift in membership, but there were so many in the actual, in positions of power in the party who really just wanted nothing to do with Corbyn, wanted to see him and this movement fail. Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting to compare how quickly, Keir Starmer has just taken control of all levers of the party compared to how long it took Jeremy Corbyn to get tentative control of any levers of the party. That whole of the staff was just stacked with right-wingers, mostly Blairites. And there are lots of different versions of right-wingers, but I think a lot of them were just traditional Blairites. People who saw, apparently, this is a story from Alex Nunn's book about Corbyn's leadership election, that on the day after Jeremy Corbyn was elected, they all wore black at headquarters in mourning for the party they'd lost. There's also the stories about how they were jubilantly searching for left-wingers to exclude and suspend in the summer of 2016 when there was an election, a second election, because they tried to topple Jeremy Corbyn. And they called it trot hunting. And apparently they rang a bell every time they managed to find someone who they could get rid of. The whole thing is crazy to imagine. And the sabotage in every single part of the party. So among councillors as well, dominated by the right of the party, that's local government. You go up to the MPs, again, dominated by the right wing. It was very easy to get a vote of no confidence through the MPs because they never started with any confidence in Jeremy. And they never gained any. So a couple of people, I think, gained a little bit, but generally they started with none, they ended with none, and that was how it worked. And so the Labour Party as an institution, it's part of the establishment, it's the official opposition. And I think a lot of us didn't really understand that. And we all, of course, went into local parties where we were facing similar kinds of opposition, really. People who just didn't want us there. People who acted weird around us, people who organised against us, people who we were having to sit in meetings with, who hated our politics. It was a weird existential experience among other things.
I'm sure.
And I'm glad you brought up that comparison to like if Bernie won, because I think like when Bernie would say things like we're gonna need a movement, it's that the work is gonna start there. Like that, what Corbyn's experience with the party is exactly like what Bernie is, I think, like was talking about there. And I also get the media, British media. I lost a lot of respect for journalists that I enjoyed reading. During like the financial crisis or the Iraq war, or even like some comedian type folks.
Yeah, a lot of comedians.
I couldn't believe it. I'm like, you guys, what's going on here? Everyone's bad on this issue. I'm trying to just laugh here. Just talk about how that must have been insane, and I like to deal with where the entire like press and media establishment is also like joining with this sort of I think project to smear the left.
Yeah, it was like a revelation to a lot of us. I think you kind of go on thinking a lot of these comedians are kind of anti-establishment, and then they see what's anti-establishment, and they react. And I realised we all realised they were actually part of the establishment. And I learned a lot about how the British establishment works. These kind of connections that are largely invisible, but are clearly there. People going to the same parties, people who've come from the same schools, people who hang out together. Our society is just horrific. And there's some actors who I can't watch anymore because they were so active in smearing Corbyn. And the weird thing is how much attention the media have given to really people who know nothing about anti-Semitism, just because they're kind of minor celebrities and they're on the right side of this issue for the media. I mean, the woman who did the sums, the maths in Countdown, and who'd been on which is a kind of game show, and she'd been on the you have Dancing with the Stars, don't you? We have it's got a different name but it's the same show. She'd been on that. She was rubbish, but she kind of got together with her partner on that, and suddenly she's coming up telling everyone she's Jewish and how horrific Corbyn is and all this stuff. And David Baddiel, a failed comedian who actually did blackface as part of his comedy. The David
Baddiel, I didn't hear about this, but just to cut in, David Baddiel did a super racist, downright harassment sort of caricature of a football player in the 90s. That is like, bro, can you just take a seat for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he's on record as making horrifically sexist jokes. He's on record as making anti-Gypsy Roma traveller jokes, but he is now the guru on not just anti-Semitism, on anti-racism somehow. It's so perverse that it's really hard to know how you take on like that, because he was an interviewee on Holocaust Memorial Day here. He was like one of the news channel's interviewees. It was bizarre.
Yeah. And, I mean, the thing that's on top of just like the attacks on Corbyn and like, just remind folks like, Corbyn's still out there. Corbyn's still doing, amazing stuff.
He was here recently.
He was just in the U.S., advocating for the U.S. not to torture Julian Assange. And like, so he's still out there fighting. But this is a moment in the UK where by any, in any other context, you would expect the Labour Party to be really active in, I don't know, call me old fashioned, in the labor struggles that we're seeing across the country. And you see Keir Starmer basically telling people, I mean, this was a few months back, but telling people that if they showed solidarity with the RMT strikes, that they would be disciplined by the party. And again, like, not to be too literal about this, but this is the goddamn Labour Party. And you have the leaders telling people you can't show solidarity with labor action in the country.
Yeah. I mean, it was standing on picket lines was not something he allowed the shadow cabinet to do. Yeah. So that's the kind of inner circle of people in charge of different areas. If you're on the back benches, you could get away with standing on picket lines as long as you weren't too in your face about it. One person who was more in your face about it got in trouble. The Labour Party has a complicated relationship with organised labour all the way through. And in fact, the labour unions, I mean, you probably have this in the US, so you have some labour unions that are more radical and some labour unions that are much more establishment and seeking to kind of ally much more with management and we have that. And obviously those trade unionists and those trade unions are much more aligned with the Starmer project than with Corbyn. But actually, the unions had moved to the left considerably in this country, and that was part of the reason why Jeremy Corbyn was able to win, because he was able to get endorsement of the two key unions, Unite and Unison. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what Starmer would do in charge. I mean, Tony Blair didn't reverse any of the Tories' anti-union legislation at all, which meant that as soon as the Tory government came in, they could build on that and push worse and worse anti-union legislation. So Starmer has said that he would pull back on some of that, but I don't know whether he would. Right. And I think the relationship between the Labour Party and the unions is really different than the Democratic Party and the unions. And that's probably important for people to understand, that these unions are affiliated, some of them are affiliated to the Labour Party and have certain rights within the rules of the Labour Party at conference and so on, and places on committees. And so there's kind of compromises that get done through that, which I don't understand, and I'm not going to pretend that I do.
No, I think it's also just, while we're just talking about this stuff too, for the American audience, that like the Labour Party operates in a very different way, just like its structure is different from the Democratic Party. What you basically do is, if you live in a state like New York, you have to register as a Democrat so you can vote in a primary. That typically is like the extent of your involvement with them. In a state like Texas, where it's an open primary, you don't even have to do that, and you don't pay dues. You're not really like a member of the party in like a full sense that like is more typical in the UK or in Europe. So when people are saying that like we're leaving the Labour Party, it's oftentimes like a little bit different from somebody else who's saying, I will never vote for a Democrat ever again. Right. Right. It's saying like, I'm not giving my money. I'm not giving my time. I'm not giving my participation to a party that doesn't share my values, a party that wants to see my movement fail and, be defeated. Right. So I think it's just important cross-cultural understanding there that sometimes Americans, I don't think, realize the difference in the party structure. But I was wondering, if you don't mind, I mean, because it's been interesting, watching, if you could give like a sense of people who we might have considered maybe, in 2017 to be very much, standing with Corbyn or standing near Corbyn on these things, to give people a sense of maybe some of the maybe betrayals or back turnings or anything like that have been particularly surprising or disheartening for folks. I'm not expecting you to do them all, but like, it's interesting because I feel like the bench of folks that we're friendly with in the US socialist movement, in the UK socialist movement, like that list has been trimmed pretty significantly in the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's been a kind of test, hasn't it, for people? I think, like, can you hold even though it's tough? And the betrayals have been like different types of betrayals. So I've been really disappointed with some of the left media. So Owen Jones, who's quite a well-known figure, probably one of my most prominent and on TV a lot left journalists. In summer 2016, when we were really under attack, because that was the summer when they tried to topple Corbyn, we had to have another leadership election, and they were attempting to get Jeremy Corbyn to actually stand down without a leadership election and to not be on the ballot. They were trying to use legal mechanisms to get him off the ballot. All he did was spend that summer writing articles about things the left needed to address, questions the left needed to answer. And it was really bizarre because he'd written a book on the establishment. Literally, he wrote the book, The Establishment. And he couldn't see this as the establishment working. And I found him very frustrating, really, as a figure. And then Navarro Media is another kind of left-wing news outlet. And I'd say they're better than Owen Jones on this, but they very much, I think they were trying to come up with the kind of same momentum compromise that walk and chew gum, but ended up just really talking about anti-Semitism on the left. And there were figures from that who, very left-wing, very strongly with Corbyn, who went on TV and said, I think anti-Semitism is endemic in the Labour Party. And I think that was a real betrayal. I still feel that as a betrayal of us. And there was a feeling that these people felt like they were kind of above the movement a bit. And they were looking at us and analysing us and telling us what was wrong with us, rather than kind of standing with the grassroots. I mean, obviously there's people locally where you see people wavering, and when you see things get tough and then people waver in different ways, when people get accused of anti-Semitism. Sometimes people who've been solid really struggle with that and really waver and can't hold the line.
I mean, I remember myself like 20 years old. I'm from North Dakota. I don't really have a whole lot of experience on these issues, and like accusations of anti-Semitism when it came to talking about Israel being very common. And it wasn't until I read like Tony Jute, some works by him, and realizing like, oh, actually, there's a problem here that can be elaborated without you being anti-Semitic. But like, we have a culture and a media that's set up to not be forthright about that. I'm curious how. Oh, go ahead, David.
No. Keep going, Matt.
I just wanted to ask, like, where are activists, like, where are your heads at as far as like what the steps go forward? Like, has Corbyn issued any sort of idea of what the next thing is? Does the left that was standing with him, or like, okay, like what in the context of like a parliamentary system, like third parties, I take it, are generally more, practical. Like, I'm just curious where the activists' heads are at.
I think it's all splintered a lot, actually, and there's a lot of kind of bitterness there. So I think some people are traumatized by it to a great or less extent. I think we're all traumatized by it a little bit. And some people just want revenge. They don't want to be involved in politics. They just want everyone who trashed our movement to, heads on spikes, pretty much, which I have some sympathy for, but it's just too nihilistic, I think, for me. There's some people who have thrown themselves into other parties. So some people have joined the Green Party. Third parties are a real struggle here because we have a first past the post, not a proportional voting system. But the Greens have got one member of parliament. They've got a significant number of councillors, and they are a nationwide party. And so some people have gone for them. There's some attempts to start up new left parties or revive old left parties, which are not having much success, very small. Whether they have great success later on, I don't know. Then there are people who are persistently going to stay in the Labour Party. Some people who were in it already. It is the party of organised labour. It has those affiliations. For a lot of people, that is the primary significant, important thing about the party. It is the site of struggle for a lot of people. They believe it's necessary to be in. So there's a lot of people who are sticking around. There's people who made friends in the Labour Party, some of whom became councillors, some of whom just became part of their life, who are reluctant to go and are sticking around. There's people like me who are kind of more getting involved in smaller local campaigns. So I do a housing campaign locally a lot now. People are getting more involved in trade unions. As you said, there's a really important trade union struggles. We're having a winter of strikes in lots and lots of industries, and that's been really good and revived a lot of people. So there's all of that going on. There's lots of campaigns, small issue campaigns. There's other organisations like the People's Assembly, which is an anti-austerity group, which is also nationwide, that people have got involved in. But I would say a lot of people have just disappeared from politics. I think it is pretty devastating. It does feel like we really tried and we got such pushback that there's a question of like, well, what do you need to do and how can we do it? Jeremy himself is very much someone, I think, who believes in staying in the Labour Party. I don't think he'll stand as an independent candidate against Labour, because that's what it would mean. There'll be a Labour candidate in his local area and there'd be him. And I don't think he will do that.
That reminds me a little bit of Bernie too. Like I think these are guys who understand the maybe borderline fertility of certain situations, but also like they're not going to be the ones who decide to like take out the can of gasoline.
Yeah, I mean they're both older people now as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
and they've both had a hard time.
Yeah,
it's a long
I don't think we should
project,
expect it of them either. Yeah, I guess.
I don't think we should either. And I think it's really rough. I mean, if Jeremy did stand as a candidate without being in the Labour Party, anybody who said anything in support of him would get immediately excluded from the Labour Party. So his old comrades in Parliament wouldn't be able to even send a tweet wishing him luck.
Could you talk a bit? I mean, I don't think this is too surprising, but Corbyn still holds tremendous support in his district, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my good buddies lives in London. He lives near Corbyn's district, and he says, he'll go to bars and there'll be a picture of Corbyn up on the wall. Like he's still a very popular figure for the people that he's been serving for years and years and years. And not to be a one note guy, but this is one of those things where from so many of the fights that we're having, it's like a simple question of democracy where the people in Corbyn's district aren't the ones who are saying we're done with Corbyn, we want this to end. It's Keir Starmer. Somebody, I mean, how many times have people in the United Kingdom been able to vote on Starmer? Right, he comes from a very small area. Right, he hasn't had a national campaign that sort of cemented him. He's somebody who won an internal election, and I think to deny the people of Corbyn's district their ability to decide whether or not they want to stick with him or not is pretty nasty and pretty undemocratic.
Yeah, I mean, he would say, well, Jeremy Corbyn can stand as an independent. People can vote for him. Mm-hmm. And I think it obviously is undemocratic. Totally agree with you. But I think that within the Labour Party and within all the left organisations, because of what we've been through, there's these processes called due diligence, which is that we don't just let anyone stand, we check up on them first. And that kind of makes sense because there's been a lot of attacks on candidates in the media. They'll trawl through social media, they'll find anything, and they'll get these people just humiliated in public, often having to step down. That's happened repeatedly. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I'm against due diligence in context of the Labour Party. The question is whether Corbyn should pass or fail the due diligence test. And obviously we think he should pass. But if you buy the argument that he presided over a horrific wave of anti-Semitism and movement that is endemically anti-Semitic, he probably shouldn't. Within that logic, it would be very irresponsible to let him represent the Labour Party in an election. So that I think the democracy argument kind of sidesteps the main issue, which we have to have the argument about whether what happened was about anti-Semitism or was about something else. And people don't want to have that argument. This is the reason why, for example, Momentum is making a democracy argument, because they don't want to have the argument about anti-Semitism because of where we've got to with it, because they'll endure a horrific campaign against them if they do.
Well, Heather Mendick, you can follow Heather at Helen SC Legal on Twitter. Heather, thank you so much for doing this. I wish it was under better circumstances and not,
yeah, indeed.
staring into the abyss with us from across the pond. I appreciate it.
No, it's really nice to talk to you. It's nice that you're giving us the shoe space in the US. It's really important.
Of course.
Well, I mean, partially out of self-preservation too, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, you'll get it soon. Well, and I think only Bernie. Well, I think Bernie being Jewish helped a bit, didn't it? And also,
but they still tried it with him. It just didn't stick as well.
And it's also he's also doesn't take an ultra position. He's like, let's make this two-state solution work. Like, if you're not going to accept that from a senator, I mean, I guess obviously him being Jewish helps too. But man.
I mean, again, anyway, we're wrapping up, but it's also again, it's different structures. It's Bernie's associated with the Democratic Party. They can't come at him in the same way that they can with Corbyn in Labor.
Yeah. But Heather, thank you so much. And we'll do this hopefully again, maybe have some better news to talk about, or Keir Starmer, Prime Minister or something like that.
Oh my God, yeah. That'll be really interesting.
Thanks, Heather. Yes, folks. reminded of one of my favorite books by historian Christopher Hill, one of the British Marxist historians, who wrote a lot on the English Civil War. He has a book on John Milton, but it's called John Milton and the Experience of Defeat. And it's all about, basically, Milton wrote Paradise Lost after the king had been restored, the monarchy had been restored, and their entire sort of revolution had been rewound. And our two segments tonight, not to be too much of a downer, and we'll have some little fun with little Trump here, but experience of defeat, baby.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's also like historical context for losing and coming back and winning. So,
Yeah.
there is no like final. I don't even remember exactly where this is, but like there's no final defeat, no final victory. It's
Right.
sort of
exactly. Hey,
thing.
yes, the radical. My brain is gone.
I didn't want to have to do trivia right now. So.
Yeah, I know.
So that's why I just moved on. But Matt
shouldn't
decided
be going
to give it a go.
I'm trying to like tell my brain like go back to the levelers. But later the king got got again by Protestants. So it happens.
Well, we're going to go to before we go to Trump though, just because we're going to forget.
Okay.
Next week, we're moving the show back just a little bit, folks. We're going to start going live at 7 Eastern, 6 Central. From now on, I think that's going to help a few folks be able to stick around. Just fits in folks' schedule better. So, just a reminder that next week we're starting an hour earlier, and we'll be doing that from now on. Anyways, let's get to our exciting boy.
Our boy's back. Love my True Social. I love all the spyware it's definitely putting onto my onto my.
Do you have to? Yeah, isn't there some weird security stuff with True Social?
I think I gave my social nothing big, but it was worth it, 100%. And I just want to resize this window so it's not so awkward. But yeah, our boy is really upset at Ron DeSantis, who he's not going to call Meatball, because that'd be wrong to do. But this is from 2 days ago, retweeted this morning. Ron DeSanctimonious wants to cut your Social Security and Medicare, close up Florida. Now, I will say this, like we talk about, and I think it was Lenin Moreno actually was the example I was thinking of pink tide leaders that realize that, oh, this shit is actually really good politics, but then you don't follow through on it, and you still govern like neoliberal. Like there's something changing in sort of popular sentiment about things like this. And so even Trump is saying that the Republicans are hitting other Republicans about cutting Social Security and Medicare, which is, I think, positive change in the wind. I don't know what it'll amount to. Ron DeSanctimonious wants to cut your Social Security and Medicare, closed up Florida and its beaches, loves rhinos, Paul Ryan, Jeb Bush, and Karl Rove, disasters all, is backed by Globalist Club for No Growth, Lincoln Pervert Project, and Uninspired Coke. And it only gets worse from there. He's a rhino. He is a rhino in disguise whose poll numbers are dropping like a rock. Good luck, Ron. A little bit less than sincere there. Trump again. Big buildup, lots of money spent. Apparently, Meatball Ron was in Staten Island to talk to some cops recently about, I don't know, I guess he's hitting Eric Adams, not pro-cop enough. I don't know what's going on. Big buildup, lots of money spent, yet only 139 people showed up to DeSantis in Staten Island. Fox News is disappointed that his polls are crashing. Paul Ryan, very unhappy. I love how Paul Ryan's still catching strays. Because, like, there's certain things where I think this is how you can tell Trump's actually like writing some of these is if like the people he's fixated on keep coming up. Whereas like a normal speech is like, why the fuck are we mentioning Paul Ryan in every single one of these?
That's just so odd. I mean, Trump's an awful human being, but the dude can hold a grudge like nobody else.
Yes. No, I'm going to do my disclaimer about he wants to invade Mexico and we need to actually get serious about this, but let's just have a little bit of fun first. Also, so interesting to watch Fox News cover the small and unenthusiastic 139-person crowd in Staten Island for DeSantis, but stay as far away as possible from coverage of the thousands of people, many unable to get in, at the Club 47 in West Palm Beach, Florida. I call Fox News the Rhino Network, and their down big ratings accurately reflect the name. If fake news CNN was smart, which they're not, they'd go conservative and quote all Trump, all
Hell yeah.
and become a ratings juggernaut. That's beautiful, because I love that at least Trump understands how he won a little bit. Because if he was just to deny that you're all the fake news, no, he knows that CNN helped him materially.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
Right. And then one final one. Florida was great long before Ron DeSantis get here. I don't know what that.
It's just going, yeah. It's just gonna go back to DeSantis, like it continue to like shorten that.
Great long before Ron DeSantis got there. People are fleeing from New York to Florida and other places because of high taxes and out of control crime, not because the governor, thank you, President Trump, DeSanctimonious. Rick Scott did great. Even Charlie Crist had very good numbers. Sunshine and ocean, very alluring. Now, most that's true, except I would just say, like, people are leaving because it's too fucking expensive to live here. Like, when I get my ass out of here, it's not going to be because I'm taxed too fucking much. That's going to be very, very incidental. It's going to be because, oh my God, $3,000 for that? Like,
no.
Yeah,
which is already there for a lot of people. No, I mean, they're not ready. I don't think, I've gone back and forth because I do see that like there's a lot of forces lining up behind DeSantis, but like even just seeing people around him, like, I've been talking about how like we definitely get like weird bot armies in here whenever we talk about DeSantis on the program.
Yeah.
One of like the big pro DeSantis Twitter accounts was complaining about how Trump has been lying about Ron DeSantis constantly, and it's like, boy, you are not ready for the big leagues if like that's like your first response is Trump's lying.
And Trump is licking his chops too. Like if Trump himself is saying just like 2016, like, oh man, I think he's actually feeling it when it comes to like, I don't have to run against a Democrat again. I get to actually go at these motherfuckers. I could say, you want to cut Social Security, like, because ultimately that's he cares about the press. Like Trump, that's who Trump wants to impress, and he loses against Democrats with the mainstream press, but and including us, and that's why I need the point to say here we gotta get Kurt Hackbarth on here again, because everyone from fucking Tim Pool's guests to Trump's son is talking about invading Mexico all of a sudden.
And you had that nasty piece in the Atlantic from David Frum.
Yeah.
No, 100%.
Fuck Trump, but like I hope he wipes DeSantis out.
No, he's definitely gonna. I don't think those boys are ready for him at all.
No.
And it's so funny, like the COVID stuff. Like both DeSantis and Abbott, like saw the writing on the wall, with the COVID stuff, and like pivoted late. You know what I mean? Like now we sort of think of them as like the anti-COVID people, but like early on, like almost every like rational person in government recognized that like we had to respond to the crisis, and just sort of like everybody almost acted the same for the most part. And then they started to realize, oh shit, like the small bourgeoisie, there's a certain segment of our base that's about to fucking crucify us over this shit, so we're gonna pivot hard.
Well, it's funny because like fucking Trump will give Noam credit to shit on DeSantis. Noam's going to be his vice president pick. I'd be that's where I put my money, because and Noam's do it like why she kept that open, and we talked about this a little bit before on the show, but there's a good article about how we need to keep Sturgis open. So we're fuck all that shit, right?
We gotta make sure we have our motorcycle rally.
And I will say, like, that did cause a spike in nearby states. At that time, there wasn't. I traveled back to North Dakota. That was the first place I traveled after the pandemic. There was nothing there yet. The pandemic didn't really even hit the Dakotas until after that Sturgis thing. So that's why it was much easier for them to say, like, yeah, we're going to stay open. And DeSantis being like, oh, I got fucking senior citizens here. I'm not just going to grind them to the buzzsaw. And then Noam also recently, I just want to reiterate, citing against the hospitals, which we need to nationalize these hospitals. Sanford Hospital should not be run. Sanford's a sus guy. Nonetheless, the doctors that wanted to do trans care, the idea that they're just doing that because it's a profit motive and not because they care about kids is just an absurd, I guess, pastiche of actual anti-pharma and anti-profit medicine talking points. And she went against the hospital administrators and with the culture warriors in attacking trans kids, which that, to me, she's getting the fuck out of there. She's going to be Trump's vice president.
Well, folks, we're about to jump over to the post game, patreon.com/leftreckoning. You can leave us a voicemail at 1940-289-7234. That's 1940-289-7234. We'll also be taking questions from the Discord and the chat if there's any in there. We have some vintage Noam Chomsky, William Buckley debate to break down for y'all, which I'm really looking forward to, and much, much more.
Yeah, back from when Noam was a young snack. I mean, I actually got to look up the dates. He might be around our age. I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit older, but yeah.
Make me feel unaccomplished.
Yes, well.
But folks, join us over there, patreon.com/leftreckoning. I'll be back this Thursday with the Griscom stream. And one last reminder, we're moving the live shows to 6 Central, 7 Eastern from here on out. So make sure that you tune into the new time. See y'all then.
Peace.